it's been like almost 15 years since you returned the last time from space. Is right?
See. So it would have been April 2005. So yeah, a little over 13 years.
Yeah.
Almost 14 years.
Do you miss it?
You know what? Not yet. I think it's like eating a big meal. At some point, I probably will be hungry again, but right now I'm still full.
What's the biggest memory from that? Like, what is the biggest expression of the being in space in the space
Well,
station?
I think the most impressive thing about being in low Earth orbit aboard the International Space Station or the Space Shuttle was looking back at the Earth and just, our planet is so beautiful. And the colors are very bright and vivid, much more so than I had imagined, even though I'd seen the pictures and the movies before. Actually seeing it with my own eyes, it was much more impressive.
You capture it quite well in a book. You've released, it's 2 years ago, I guess?
Yes,
yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
You've taken, if I'm right, 16,000 pictures there.
Yes,
total,
yes.
like for all the missions. So why did you do that? Like, it's quite a lot of pictures. Like,
right.
You just had to kill time there, or
no? It just became kind of a hobby of mine. Looking at the Earth is so beautiful, and we have the camera equipment, and of course we're trained how to use the cameras, and so it just kind of became a hobby of mine. And I think of probably all the astronauts and cosmonauts who go to photograph the Earth and find places of interest or places that have a special meaning to me or to my friends or people who are close to me. And so a few years ago, actually, we started thinking about this project 10 years ago with Zdeněk Sklenáš. Of course, he's here in Prague. Has the art gallery, and he published the book, and he created the book. It was his imagination saying you should take your photographs and make a book, and then tell your story inside of the book. And so we finally we let it sit for a while, and then we came back to it. And as you said, almost 2 years ago, we actually went ahead and created the book.
There's a lot of interesting pictures. Like, mostly for me, the most interesting were the cities, like New York,
yes.
Beijing,
right.
the structure, with the rectangular structure. So how did you choose that? Like, you just were sitting up there and waiting for the right moment to take a picture of Beijing?
Well, sometimes what happens is you're flying and you can, you have a few moments between things that you have to do in the schedule. And so you're looking at the Earth with a camera and you see something interesting. And so you take pictures of that. But other times you make a plan. You say, well, I want to take a picture of Beijing. And so we have a computer aboard, which of course can tell us when we will fly over Beijing and what the lighting conditions will be. And so when you find a favorable time, then you can set your alarm and then be ready to have an opportunity to shoot that target if the weather is good.
Yeah, get ready, Beijing is coming. Yeah.
Yes, right, yes, yes.
It's pretty nice. Like, we're getting what's really interesting, the equipment.
Yes.
Because how did you take these pictures? Because they're pretty sharp. Like, it's.
Oh yes, thank you. Well, it takes some practice because this is all handheld photography.
Really.
And so what we have on board, we have lenses, different sets of lenses. The longest lens that was aboard when I was there was 400 millimeters. And then we use a doubler, so it's effectively an 800 millimeter lens. And we shoot at about, we shoot at about 1/500th of a second. But we're traveling very quickly, about 7 kilometers a second. And so you have to learn to track the target as you release the shutter. You have to focus.
Yeah.
Even though we're about 400 kilometers up, it's still not infinity. You can't just go to infinity because it won't be sharp. And so you have to use a little bit of practice to do all that. And plus, we're weightless. You're up in space. So you have to use your feet to hold something. Otherwise, you just float away from the window.
That's amazing. So you just take a picture through the window.
Yes.
Like, that's... How do you keep it clean?
Yes, you have to keep the window clean because, of course, there's smudges from people's noses looking at the window, so you have to keep it clean. There are certain windows that are optically correct, so you can take those sharp images. Yeah. Interestingly, one of the biggest windows aboard the space station is in the U.S. laboratory, but it has a plastic protective cover over it. And so it's not optically correct. So you can't really take photographs through it.
Of course, quite highlighted picture from the film book is the Great Chinese Wall. But,
yes, right.
What's your favorite picture?
Oh, gosh, it's hard to pick a favorite.
I guess most of them are favorite, I guess.
Yeah. No, places, like I said, we look for places of significance. I think the Great Wall was one of the big, kind of an accomplishment for me because of my Chinese heritage. Even though I was born in the U.S., I wanted to take a picture of the Great Wall if I could, because there was this debate whether or not you can actually see it with your naked eye from space. And so I wanted to try to settle that argument once and for all. So I was looking for it, and I knew about what parts of China where you might have a good chance of seeing the wall, and I started taking pictures. Now, I never did see it myself with the naked eye, but I did capture it in a few photographs. NASA analyst found the wall and sent the photos back to me and showed me where it was. And so, I was able to capture it, although I can't say you can really see it with the naked eye.
Yeah, you had to get the small arrows in the book
the arrows to show where it is.
Maybe back to your experiences in space, because we've already talked that it's like 13-14 years since you came back the last time. So I guess the space program, the space industry has changed quite a lot since then.
Yes.
What's the biggest change?
I think the biggest change is you've seen commercial companies, most notably SpaceX with Elon Musk and Blue Origin with Jeff Bezos. These companies are different from traditional aerospace companies in that both of these people, these leaders, they're visionary and they're committed to, in the case of Blue Origin, to build infrastructure in space around the Earth and the Moon to encourage new business. And in the case of SpaceX and Elon Musk, he wants to travel to Mars, and in fact, he wants to establish human colonies on Mars. And so that's quite a departure from any other companies at any other time. And so they're kind of driving progress towards these goals, much more so than government space programs.
So it's more diverse, let's say.
Yes.
Because the government mostly went for some, let's say, explorational...
government, back in the 1960s, NASA was a new agency, and the bureaucracy was probably at a minimum, and they were able to get from nothing to the moon in less than 11 years, just a little over 10 years. And so it's pretty amazing, from not even existing to landing astronauts on the moon in, a little over 10 years is incredible, almost. Nowadays, NASA, of course, has grown, which happens to all organizations, I think, to a large degree. They turn into this pretty huge bureaucracy. Yeah. So they're less efficient, they take longer, it takes more money. So although NASA is working on a space exploration program, they really don't have the funding for the machine to really be able to get this going. We're working slowly on it, but really these small, nimble entrepreneurial companies, which are led by these visionaries, and they have relatively flat management structure, so their bureaucracy is at a minimum. They're able to move much more quickly and efficiently.
Yeah, they're in their first 11 years.
Exactly. Yes.
How big is the disadvantage that NASA can do the flights from the American soil, that they have to use Russian places?
Yes.
And basically the second one is China. So how big is the disadvantage?
Well, it's been I think it's been it was a mistake for us to retire the space shuttle so quickly, because since 2011, when we did that, we've been unable to launch our own astronauts, the United States, that is, from American soil to the International Space Station. We've been totally reliant on Russia since that time. Now, next year, they were scheduled, SpaceX and Boeing will have their first test flights of the new commercial vehicles, and hopefully the year after that we will begin normal operations of bringing astronauts again, U.S. astronauts from U.S. soil to the ISS. But yeah, it has been... it has been slow going. Back when we did retire the shuttle in 2011, it was anticipated that these new vehicles would be ready much sooner. But of course, it never is as soon as you think.
I don't want to use the expression, but shit happens. So take long.
Right.
Yeah. On the other hand, I guess it helps Chinese space program a lot. That they are capable of doing, like sending their own people. Like.
Right. So China in 2003 became only the third nation able to launch astronauts into space. And right now, today, they're only one of two nations, Russia and China, who can launch astronauts into space. And so they have made very steady progress since that point. They have flown both on the manned side and the unmanned side. On the manned side, of course, they've flown several crews to space. They've flown 2 space labs, which you can think of as small space stations. They've flown their first women. They've done their first spacewalks. And starting in 2020, they will begin construction on their own space station. And it will be international. They're making agreements with many countries in Europe, the Canadians, and probably maybe the Japanese even, to have cooperation with their astronauts and their scientists to work together. So they're very serious. They have launched a probe most recently about a week ago to the far side of the moon. This is the first of its kind. And so if it's successful, it will be the first spacecraft to reach the far side of the moon and actually land. And so they will make some interesting measurements from that. China has also announced their own plans to send their astronauts to the moon. They haven't set a timetable yet, but they hinted it would maybe be in the mid-2030s. So they are ambitious. They're spending more and more money every year, and this is kind of their culture. They're in this for what we call the long haul. Yeah.
But you last year in some interview mentioned that their program is cheaper than the American one. Here you say that they're spending quite a lot of money. So how do they understand it? Like it's cheaper because it's new. So and they already, let's say, know the technology from the other countries, let's say, or they have
they spend they spend a fraction of what, say, for example, NASA spends every year. Now the reason for that, I mentioned before, NASA's become quite a big bureaucracy, which is not unusual for a large organization, whether it's in government or in private industry even, but it takes more money. And our labor rates and things like that in the United States are much higher than in China. And so China, it's a little hard to know exactly how much they spend. They're not totally transparent, let's say. And but the amount of money that's estimated that they spend is a small fraction of what NASA spends. Now, nonetheless, they were able to do more with that money, probably because mostly their labor rates are lower, I guess there were different ways to do the accounting to say how much money you're spending. But the main point is that they are increasing the amount. They're increasing their investment in their space program. And NASA has been pretty flat. There's been a very, very small increases here and there. But by and large, I would say for the last 10 or more years, it's been actually even longer. It's been pretty flat, even though we talk a lot about an exploration program. We've had enough money to work on new spacecraft and new rockets, but even those are not scheduled to launch until several years from now.
So I guess that's a reason for using more the private sources, let's say, SpaceX and so on. Is there this private influence in China too, or they don't need it?
There actually are some commercial companies in China, surprisingly. Now, I think a lot of them won't succeed, but and it's a little bit surprising that even the Chinese government allows this. But I'll be curious to see how that goes. They have at least one Chinese rocket company, commercial. They tried to launch not too long ago, and they didn't make it. The rocket failed, but that's to be expected more or less when you're developing a new rocket. But we'll see how that goes. But for now, I think China's main space effort is the government program. They're very committed to it.
You were talking about the Chinese space station that it will be international, but so what do we expect? Like, because ISS is ending. It's gonna.
Well, hopefully, hope not, but yes, the plan is for it to end.
Probably in next 10 years.
Actually, President Trump has said that he wants the space station to end in 2024, 2025. So actually, in the next 6 to 7 years. And I think that's a big mistake. He talks about making it commercial, but really that's unrealistic because the space station was never designed to be profitable. You need a big group of people, both in Houston in the Mission Control Center and also outside of Moscow at their control center. And the cost of launching things, not only astronauts, but supplies, experimental equipment, things like that, up and down to and from the station. All those costs are prohibitive for anything but a government to fund. And so I don't see any way a commercial operator can make that work.
So what do you think? There's going to be only Chinese international station, or that the USA is gonna force it to have like two stations? Like I
hope not. And if history is any teacher, our last administrator wanted to end space station in 2015. And fortunately got extended to 2020 and then to 2024. And so I'm hopeful that this latest deadline, 2024, 2025, by then we should have a new president. Even if Trump gets elected to a second term, by that point we should have a new president, and hopefully that will get canceled, and we will continue to operate the station. The reason I say that is because the space station actually is a very important piece of any future exploration program. The biggest technological challenge for sending people, for example, to Mars is biomedical. It's how do you keep astronauts healthy? Because the space environment is very, negative towards your health. And so we have to use a real facility in space, like the space station, to do the research work necessary to see what we can do to counteract, countermeasures for these negative effects. Also, the space station serves as a test bed, again, a real situation test bed for things like life support systems. We still really don't know how to build very robust life support systems. Mm-hmm. If we're going to go to Mars, your system has to be robust, right? And so you have to test and develop these things in a real environment like the space station.
You're talking about the meaning of this space station. I was kind of thinking, and I mean no disrespect, but you spent over 200 days in space in total.
Right.
You've taken so many pictures. You've done quite a lot of work there. But still, do we need people to do this work?
Well, the other part of that is the unmanned side. So sending space probes without people. I mean, we've seen spectacular results. Probes to Mars, rovers on Mars. Very recently, I think just Voyager 2 left our solar system. And so a lot of very fascinating things. We've explored Pluto. We've explored comets and asteroids. Right now, NASA has a mission called OSIRIS-REx that just rendezvoused with an asteroid that says 2 billion kilometers away. So we're getting fantastic results from these unmanned efforts. But I think we need to do both. I think the public and scientists like both. Humans are very flexible. And even the program leader of the Mars rovers said, what takes me and my rovers sending commands and being very careful several months to do, a human can do in a few minutes. So I think you kind of need both. You always send the unmanned probes first, or to the places where you can't send humans yet, and then you send humans later, because people always identify with an explorer, a human explorer who's there. And, I think it makes it, that's part of the human experience.
We've been talking about Mars, about the moon, like some kind of base there. What's going to be first from point of view?
Well, I think moon, because it makes a lot of sense to go to the moon first, even though the Apollo missions went to the moon such a long time ago, nearly 50 years ago. But the thing is, when we sent Apollo to the moon, we never intended to stay. It was just to get there, basically get some rocks, plant a flag, and show that we beat the Russians, right? Beat the Soviet Union. So it was no surprise that program ended. And so now we're looking at the moon very differently. It will be a kind of a rehearsal area where we would train for missions to Mars. We will develop our equipment to go to Mars. But at the same time, we can do very interesting things there. There's different science that we can do on the moon, different kinds of observations. And we're going to build, the current plan is for NASA to build a very small space station around the moon called the Gateway. And that will be kind of a staging area to go either to the surface or to do other operations around the moon, or to launch from there to a place like Mars.
So when we're going to go to the moon?
Well, that's a good question because, as we were talking about before, although we've been talking about all these great things and there have been some studies done and even some hardware being built, we don't have the funding. We don't have a commitment from the U.S. government to fund this program. So right now we don't have a real program, and we haven't for many years, even though during the Obama administration, the 8 years he talked about being the Mars president and funding a Mars program, there was no program because the funding was the increase was only very modest. And there was enough to kind of continue building some hardware. But it was nothing like the Apollo program where the president made a commitment by a certain date and the Congress and everyone was behind him. And we went ahead and actually, funded it. For example, in the Apollo program at the peak, NASA probably received close to 5% of the U.S. budget. And nowadays, NASA is receiving about 0.4%.
That's a decrease.
Yes.
So probably it's really possible that it's going to be not private, like let's say the commercial companies getting to the moon, to the Mars.
I think so. I think so. Now it's possible that we could have a government commercial collaboration. I mean, the collaboration's already happening with NASA help, wanting these companies to help provide transportation to and from the International Space Station. So it could be expanded to include exploration. So, but the devil's in the details. The cultures are quite different between a big bureaucracy like NASA and a smaller entrepreneurial company. But it's possible.
At the beginning, I asked if you miss being in space. So maybe are you looking forward to the possibility that you can maybe go back?
Well, I've spent, as you said, almost 230 days in low Earth orbit. So I've kind of done that. If I had an opportunity to go to the moon or to Mars, I would definitely want to do that.
Maybe even to stay there, to go to the surface and whatsoever. That's probably the next step.
Yeah, except that I don't want to live there. I want to come back. I would love to go explore, but I would rather live here on the Earth.
I'm really looking forward to you going either to moon or either to Mars to get another picture.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, right.
Because it would be amazing.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Amazing.
Thanks.